Welcome everyone. So today we're going to talk about gender in Latin America. We're going to go a brief review of this topic. So first, what is gender? What I want you to do right now is write down all the words and phrases that come to your mind when you hear the word gender, okay? And then write down all the words that come to your mind when you hear the word sex, okay? So you'll have time to answer those two things. So once you've answered that, we're going to review these and review your comments. We're going to review some definitions. So society and culture create gender roles, no? So understanding it like this, we need to view gender as a cultural construction. It's not a given, it's not a natural thing. It's culturally and socially constructed, okay? So the roles that are established by each society are prescribed as ideal and appropriate behavior for a person of that specific sex. Gender is a way of referring to the social organization of the relationship between the sexes. This concept of social organization has itself a history that is in part based on certain attributes to sexes. And these attributes are socially prescribed. Okay? The gender is a constitutive element of social relationships based on perceived differences between the sexes. And the key word here is perceived. And then gender also is a primary way of signifying relationships of power. This is from a theoretical perspective of gender. And then it's also a system of relationships that establishes relationships of power, and they're based on perceived natural differences. So one of the most important gender theories is Joan Scott, and she is one of her main ideas is that gender becomes a way of denoting cultural constructions, the entirely social creation of ideas about appropriate roles for women and for men. It is a way of referring to the exclusively social origins of the subjective identities of men and women. Subjective, meaning they are created by each subject, but each subject is part of a society that is imposing on them this notion of who they are. So gender is in this definition a social category imposed on a sexed body. So Marta Lamas, who's a Mexican feminist, she gives us also an adds to this understanding of gender. Using a gender perspective does not imply to ignore the existence of biological differences. On the contrary, it forces a recognition of these differences to ensure that sexual difference does not translate into social difference, and this is key. Now, another concept that comes into, especially when we talk about in everyday life, everyday society, about sex and gender, is the concept of sexual division of labor. This concept contributes to a coherent analysis of social roles clearly differentiated by sex, and it has been used as a way of explaining differences in society and how societies evolved by many sciences. This division is considered to be a social construction, which means it can be changeable, which determines the main roles individuals must play in a society. Women supposedly in charge of social reproduction, and men of production work. It's this understanding, what it does is sets up a hierarchical power relations. that force the majority of women to carry out work that has no visibility or social recognition. They're relegated to the domestic sphere, and the domestic sphere um, has acquires no value. This cultural matrix is reproduced in the public sphere, where women occupy the most precarious and worst paid jobs. This vicious cycle of inequality generated by socially imposed obligation to perform domestic work, particularly care activities, largely explains women's absence of, for example, from politics or decision making in general. Now, we're gonna do an activity, and you, in your notes, you write, where you're gonna watch some pictures, and what you're gonna write is describe what you see, and then explain the image. What's happening? What's the story behind the image? What does it tell you about gender and gender relations? Okay. So I'll put each image, and I'll give you time for you to take your notes. You can also pause and take your notes as you see the images. Pay attention to detail. And remember, these are all images from Latin America. You just quickly go back to what you're supposed to do. There, you take notes, describe what you see, explain the image, what's happening, what's the story, and what does it tell you about gender and gender relations. So once you do your notes, in our session we'll review and have a discussion of these notes. So women in Latin America, they are overrepresented among the poor. They are underrepresented in politics. In the job market, there's no pay parity, but they are a crucial force in the labor market. Almost half of all women over the age of 15 have no income of their own, but do work. The number of one-parent households headed by women has increased, and only a minority of men are occupied in unpaid work or domestic labor. Although it is thanks to women's work that the region's poverty index has decreased by almost 10 percent points, women continue to earn less than men for equivalent work. So we leave this part of our gender relations lecture, and then we'll have a second one where we address more cultural understandings of gender relations in Latin America with machismo and Marianismo. Thank you.